All right, looks like we're live. Hey guys, so we are back. So this is live stream number 5. It looks like this might be a really good time to hold the live streams a Thursday afternoon, early evening, around 5 p.m. Eastern. That seems like a pretty popular time, so I think I'm going to stick with it to the extent that I'm able to. So really glad you're here. And also I've been chopping these up and splicing up these videos that begin as live streams, but I've been taking clips of them and releasing them separately. And they happen to do quite well. While I might only get, a few handful of people here at the live stream, when it's live, some of those videos are getting almost 1,000 views, which is pretty incredible and unexpected. So I should also point out that if you are interested in my own research, maybe one day I can do a live stream about this stuff. I'll put a link in the chat box here. It's also in the description of this video, the live stream, that if you're interested, I recently did an interview with the guy named Elijah Moore. He has a YouTube channel called Spotlight with Elijah Moore, and he does great work. He's interviewed, although he's a student, he's an undergrad, he is graduating, he's going to grad school. He has interviewed other professors. He's all the way over in Iowa and interviewed other professors. He's interviewed the mayor of his town, the president of his university, that sort of thing. So I got a chance to be on that show with him, and he interviewed me about my research on depression. So if you're interested in that topic, go there for kind of an in-depth dive into the kind of work like research I actually do when it comes to academic research. So, and if you like it enough, maybe we can do a few videos on that. Now this live stream, number 5, I decided to address and tackle this debate: faith versus reason. Faith or reason? This is an old debate, and the idea here is, do I just believe in God because it's just sort of an article of faith? I just take it on faith. And what I mean by that is believe in God merely based on faith. That's what I want to highlight. So this question, this is also in the description as well, but I'll post in the text box here. Is belief in God merely based on faith? Now, some terminology is in order here. So what do I mean by belief? Sometimes people can understand that term belief just to be like religiously loaded. I don't mean it in that way here. I mean it in the philosophical sense, a technical sense. Here, when I say belief, I just mean that you hold it to be true. You hold it to be the case. Of course, the belief can be false, so it may end up not being true, but you hold it to be the case, that it's a certain sort of way. So belief is just in terms of its value and weightiness. It can be something really insignificant. Can be significant, like belief in God, but it doesn't necessarily have to be religiously loaded. Belief, I could believe that, I don't know, the sun's going to rise tomorrow. I mean, or I could believe that, I don't know, that this is the table in front of me, So it could be something that inconsequential, that's something just mundane, and it can be directed at God. The only difference here is just that it's the object of the belief, whatever I have my object of attention as. What is my attention focused on? So that's what I take belief to be. Doesn't necessarily have to be religiously loaded. Faith, on the other hand, is that religiously loaded? Well, usually in everyday conversation and discussion, people take this word faith in a very religiously loaded way. Not always, but much of the time they do. Thanks, Pry here. So what's the question? Just to recap, faith or reason? What is reasoning? What is reasoning is basically faithful. Yeah, so just to recap so far, the general theme here, the idea for this whole meet here and greet here, is faith or reason. Are those things mutually compatible? Do you have to do one or the other? When it comes to belief in God, of course. And so we're first addressing just this first option, faith. What is it? And unpacking that more specifically, is belief in God merely based on faith? So there's, in that question, is belief in God merely based on faith? I first addressed that term belief. I don't think belief is necessarily a religiously loaded term. You can use it in all sorts of mundane ways. Like, I believe that this table is going to hold up me, this chair is going to hold me up, this table is going to hold up my computer, that sort of thing. Next one would be the term faith. That's where we are now. So most people use that term faith in a religiously loaded sense, but there have been some thinkers who have thought that faith can even be used in a kind of neutral way as well. Like, we do talk this way sometimes. We talk in terms of, I have faith in myself. I have faith that you're gonna succeed in life or something, right? You can use faith in that way as well. But what do we mean when we say that I have faith in something? Like, it can also, some people even think that it can be as mundane as I have faith that this chair is going to hold me up, because some people have argued that faith has 4 components. One, it's going to have a propositional component or a belief to it. This is the propositional component. And there's going to have a belief or an attitude component with respect to that. That is, it's a proposition. What is it a faith about? We do talk about like faith in, but what do you mean faith that? Faith that, because propositions work like this. I believe that the sky is blue. Propositions are that phrases, that the sky is blue in this case. So faith works like that as well. I don't always just talk about faith in somebody. I can also talk in terms of faith that this or that will happen. And it seems to be also future oriented. But and it also have to hold, so there has to be a proposition involved, number one. Number two, I'm holding it to be the case. That's where belief comes in. But there are these further things too. There's a trust component right here. Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate that. I'll get to this here in a sec, but let me finish this thought first, promise. So there's a trust component to faith. So even when you're talking about faith just in a mundane sense, like I have faith that this chair is going to hold me up. That is the proposition that this chair is going to hold me up. Belief that that's true. I hold it to be the case. I hold it to be true. 3, I have to trust that it will hold me. This is more apparent when we talk about the 4th condition as well. There has to be some action that I take with respect to that trust, right? The trust has to be there first place, but how do I test that trust? I actually have to sit down in the chair, right? That I have to prove the faith to be true. So if you're breaking faith down, it means something along those lines. And there's also this additional element of being future. It can be future oriented, but also it doesn't necessarily have to be. Like, I can say, I have faith that, I suppose, like, I guess if you have faith, like that your wife will be faithful, there's another sense of the word faithful. Yeah, that doesn't necessarily, it might connote a future orientation, because faithfulness is not just present, but it's also like you will remain faithful. So there's a future orientation, but yeah. But that's not even mundane. So faith, obviously, if you take this mundane application and you're like, okay, if that's what faith is, then when you apply it to faith in God, what do you mean? Well, faith that God will do something, faith that God is good, faith that God will, be faithful on his promises, will make good on his promises, will, offer salvation and make good on salvation, everybody, that sort of thing. That's what we mean by faith when we unpack it in that analytical way. Okay, let me get to your activity here, Brian. Okay, so you say, I'm new here. I'm really slow when it comes to learning. Hey, I am too. Like, it took me like 15 years to get through college, and that is not an exaggeration. I did 5 years of undergrad and 10 years of grad school, and I kind of had to marinate. And a lot of things are just like that with me. It just takes me a while. So is faith religious as in Christianity? Reason equals atheist, that is logical, etc., like science and stuff. Yeah, so this is the dichotomy, the 2 only options. There's the reason why I titled this live stream, this meeting, this way, faith or reason, as if they're opposed. faith versus reason, is because people will claim that those are really the only options. Like if you're religious, I guess you're just going to have faith. And if you're reasonable, then you wouldn't have faith. This is like a really cheap and simplistic criticism of those with faith. So the purpose of me discussing this is to really examine what the heck they mean by that, and really to dismantle that criticism, because I think it's wrong. I think that people who are religious can also be reasonable, quite reasonable, actually. So back to this question, is belief in God merely based on faith? Well, we talked about belief, what that means. It's propositional. We talked about faith, that requires trust. Merely, that means, and you can think of faith in just like an everyday sense of just like, I have faith and I don't really use reason. I don't think those are mutually exclusive, which we'll talk about in a few moments. But I think you wouldn't necessarily only just like, because normally when people talk about faith, they mean something like blind faith. They just mean like, I got here, I didn't use any thinking whatsoever. I'm just a sheep. I'm just doing what my pastor told me to do, or what my parents raised me on. That's what people think faith is, but that's just a misunderstanding of what faith is. So if you mean faith like that, then no, belief in God is not merely based on that. You can use reason to get there. Yeah. Does faith and reason have to be separate? Like, can they not both be inclined to one another? Is that not possible? I think that it's possible, and very likely is what is happening, right? So, yeah, this is a good point, Charles. In the Catholic tradition, faith and reason are seen as complementary. That is, they help each other. 2 feet that you walk on, that walk you to the narrow path to salvation. Do Protestants place the same emphasis on the duality? I believe that they do. Like, of course, not all Protestants. You can't overgeneralize. But the Protestants that see, because I have a academic philosophy background, so I know both worlds. Like I grew up in a Protestant environment in which the intellect wasn't really emphasized as much as I understand it now and emphasize it now. So those would be people who would just like, oh, blind faith, but so there are very many of those people, but I don't see a lot of those today in the circles that I walk in, because a lot of my colleagues in philosophy and in theology are Protestant, and they will affirm both faith and reason. Absolutely. And they'll even use people like Thomas Aquinas to do it, even though he's Catholic. Yeah. Good. Yeah. So that's a good point, Les Frybender. Faith is belief in that which is unseen. And this is Paul's characterization of faith. Faith is believing that which is unseen. Yeah. That's another element too, because even if you think about in that mundane scenario that I talked about, like with these 4 components of faith, it's got to be propositional. It's got to be a belief that you're holding. You hold it with, but trust and action. So you have to trust, and it's future oriented. So I don't know that the chair will hold me up. I have to test, I have to trust, I have to act on it. I have to, because if I say that I have faith, if I say that I have faith in something, and then I never act on that, it probably couldn't truly be said that I have faith in that thing. So, yeah. So I mentioned, and feel free, guys, to pop your. I love fielding questions. I'm someone who is like very interactive when it comes to, I'm used to being in the classroom, and it's a little unfortunate that I can't just see you guys and like interact with you in real time, that sort of thing. It's got to be through a chat window. We do what we can with what we have, of course, here, but I'm used to being in the classroom. That's what fuels me, and I love fielding questions. I love responding to, points that people are making. So yeah. Now, like I said, Thomas Aquinas, he has a view in which faith and reason are in harmony with one another. They're not mutually exclusive. There is no conflict between faith and reason. You can use reason to access things that involve God. You can use reason to know that God exists, for example. Did you actually know this? What actually, let me ask you guys. Let me get a quick idea of the room here. If I were to ask you this question, do you think, actually, let me just ask it this way. Can one prove that God exists? What do you think about that question? Yay or nay? Just like immediate reaction here. Can one prove that God exists? Actually, this was discussion in our classroom yesterday that led into the discussion of the 5 ways, arguments for God's existence. So last 5 says no. That's actually what a lot of my students had said too. And I almost wish like I can just unpack it and be like, well, why do you think that? And so I'll just give you the example that they gave. They would say something like this. Well, you know, you can't prove it. You can, right, exactly. So just thinking about God, kind of like, oh, well, that seems to be something that's like subjective, right? This is the way that they were speaking. They were like, you know, you can feel it. You can have an opinion, perhaps. You can have faith that God exists, but as far as like proving that, proving implies that you can demonstrate it to somebody else who doesn't believe it, and then they would believe it. And many people today would deny that you can prove God's existence in that way. However, I think this is mistaken. And Thomas Aquinas, actually, who's a philosopher from the 1200s, he thinks this is mistaken as well. So it all depends on what you mean by that little word prove. What do you mean by prove? Well, proof, like proof. Let me actually show you this. I'm gonna pull up this window here. Here we go. Can we prove that God exists? It depends on what you mean by prove, of course. We cannot prove God's existence in the way that one can prove a theorem of mathematics, like the Pythagorean theorem, as you see here, by pure logic from axioms that everyone accepts. Now, this is, as you know, you may remember the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. This is a demonstration of that. So it's actually quite clever. And you can find videos of this online. And it's interesting because you see this a square and this b square, and they're filled up with liquid in these demonstrations. And then it's kind of like on this turn wheel. And when it turns, a and b start at the bottom. And then when it turns so that c is on the bottom, and the liquid from a and b drip down into c, and they completely fill c without any spillage and no room left. Because, of course, the volume, or really these are plain figures, but it's quite thin, but the volume of liquid here is equal. A and B are equal to C. That's a demonstration of that. Now, can you prove that God exists like that? No, of course not. But you wouldn't expect to prove those things either. So let me give you an example. So there are very few things. Prove does not always mean, it can mean sometimes, but it does not always mean 100%. Come on. Certainty. Certainty means 100%. Like you cannot be in error about this. And in fact, there are very, very few things that you can actually ever be 100% certain about. One category would be mathematical truths. You can be 100% certain about those. You can be 100% certain about logical truths. Like you've probably seen this one before. If A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then that means that A is greater than C. Like that's just a logical truth. It's demonstrable. You can demonstrate it. You can prove to people that that's the case. And sometimes you don't even have to prove it because you can just understand that just by basic rational insight that that's the case. So Now, so to back up and to explain here, so I don't lose anybody, sorry about that. You cannot know for certain that God exists. However, that doesn't mean you can't know that God exists, okay? Because there are only a few things that you can know with certainty, like 100% certain, that you cannot possibly be in error about. That's okay though, because we can know things without having that high a bar of like 100% certainty. We can know things even lower. Like, for example, do you know where you parked your car? If you drive, right? If you have a car, do you know where you parked it? Probably. I can know a lot of things. I can know where I parked my car. I can know that my wife loves me. I can know that I've got a degree in philosophy, like those sorts of things. I can know those things. I'm not 100% certain about them because I can't be. And that's okay. That's just the world works, right? I'm not 100% certain I know where I parked my car, if I'm being really honest about that, because I could misremember. Somebody could have come and stolen it. Like, if do you know where your car is now? Yes, but are you 100% certain? No, you can't be. That's okay though, because all empirical matters, like things that you touch and feel and see, right? Things with your five senses, every empirical matter you cannot be certain about. Notice that the only categories of things that you can be certain about are mathematical truths, logical truths, and Descartes has this cogito ergo sum, this I think, therefore I am. You can be certain about that. But those three things, that's it. Like, those are the things you can be 100% certain about. You cannot ever be in error about that. To take the last one, for example, this will be easy to see. Like, if I'm thinking, I exist. Like, that's just entailed by that. If thinking is happening, if I'm the thinker, then the thinker has to exist in order to do the thinking. So that's what he's saying there. I think, therefore I exist. So you can't be in error about that. That's self-evident. It's obvious. It's 100% certain. That's about it, though. So I think people get confused about even what it means to know. My original question was, can one prove that God exists? And let's go back to that right here. Like I said, it all depends on what you mean by prove. If you mean prove, like this high a bar of 100% certainty, of course you can't do that. But you can prove if all you want to do is know, right? Like, if you think of knowledge as a beaker, right? Like, think of it as, like, if I had like an iPad here with like a PDF annotator or something with like an Apple Pen or something, I could draw with this. But so think of this as like a beaker, and I'm filling my beaker with liquid, and that liquid is evidence. So if I fill it to the top of the beaker, that would be 100% certainty. Like, I could not possibly in error about that. But a little bit lower is where you need for just to know. Like, the bar is not that high to know. It's going to be a little bit lower. And that's all I need, right? Because I can still prove to somebody, not with certainty, but I can still prove to someone where I parked my car. I just go out there and look at it. But I could still possibly be in error about that. Now, back to this. Aquinas thought, to finish this thought real quick, and then we'll get to the chat. Aquinas argues that we can know by natural reason and not only by faith that there is a God. We can know this because you have to keep in mind what it means to know. And it's not going to be 100% certainty. And you can do that using one's own reason. It's not just, I have faith. It's just my opinion. I just feel like it. It's not just like the subjective state or feeling or something. I can actually know with my reason and not just kind of feel a certain way. Okay. Now, I would love to demonstrate that for you, because I did consider spending some time on maybe this live stream, maybe a future one, talking about what are called Aquinas's 5 ways or arguments for God's existence. It may be too much to do in just one live stream, but let me go back to the chat here, so I just make sure I don't miss anything. I've been talking a little while. Okay. So I love how active the chat is. I really appreciate you guys. All right, let's see. Yeah, so that's right. Reasonable deductive conclusion versus demonstration of theory. That's correct. Yeah. Example, we can't prove the universe is X amount of years old, but we can reasonably conclude on a rough estimate. Of course, yeah. That's not. It's going to be inductive or abductive reasoning rather than deductive reasoning. Well, it can involve deductive reasoning, but it's going to involve some empirical starting points as well. And that's fine. Pry mentions I really only understand a few choice words and selectively. Like Chelsea says, give yourself grace in the sense of, be kind to yourself. Don't be too down on yourself, because that's how we all start. Honestly, like I try not to use too many buzzwords, and when I do use jargon, I try to explain those things. So sorry about that, but I'll try to help you keep up. Okay, this is the rabbit trail I've been on a bit lately, so this is timely good. Proper academic training. I'm trying to learn more about how do we know what we know, the scriptures, revelation, and so on. Let's see. That's good. That's why I think the most intellectually honest position for everybody to assume is agnosticism. A person then has to provide reasons for leaning towards or away from theism. I think there's a grain of truth to that. Here's why. I think this is a fair agnosticism. I think is a fair agnosticism. Again, the idea that I just don't know, like I'm going to remain neutral. I think that's the most neutral starting position one can take. Problem is that many people don't take that. Many people start with atheism, for example. And you see this in public discourse, especially online. Gosh, you will see people claiming that atheism is the default, or naturalism, for example. Naturalism is the view that only the natural world exists. Well, if that's true, then the supernatural world doesn't exist. You've already taken a position, like the actual neutral position would be here. I don't know. Here's one possibility, that naturalism, no supernatural beings exist, God, demons, angels, all that. Just the natural world exists. Here's another option over here that those things do exist. So they don't exist over here, naturalism. This, like religion, supernatural sort of stuff, exists. The neutral position wouldn't be naturalism. Let's just all assume it doesn't exist. No, the neutral position would be somewhere in the middle, where you just start with the idea that maybe they exist, maybe they don't. That would be the much more intellectually responsible position from which to start. And I think you're right that a person has to provide reasons, or acquire reasons, I would say, for leaning towards or away from theism. And I think that theism does absolutely have those resources to provide. And I would also mention that I think that agnosticism, that neutral position, although it is a reasonable and responsible starting point, I don't think it's a responsible end point. I don't think that anybody should stay there. I think it's a fine initial point to begin with, but it's not a final point. I don't think so. All right. Let's see. All right. To be agnostic theist. Again, I don't think that's right either. If it's more than agnostic theist, we're reaching the point of needing to demonstrate something, just believing in the best explanation. Again, it depends on what you mean by demonstrate, right? So I'm not going to be able to demonstrate this through like, if you say, well, many people will be very cynical about this. They'll say, if God exists, he can just come down and show himself. Yeah, I suppose that's logically possible, but it's also very cynical, because you assume that you're the arbiter of things, and that if you demand that God shows up, he's going to do it. And if he doesn't, I guess, like, he would necessarily have to arrive on your demand, and if he doesn't, that's proof that he doesn't exist. That's really crazy. So I'm not saying that you're suggesting that, but if one expects a demonstration like that, then that's way too irresponsible, I think. Yeah. So yeah, let's actually look at this again here. Another component of this right here, we can know by natural reason and not only by faith that this is God. This should generate some discussion. This second sentence that I hadn't gotten to yet. This knowledge is available to anyone with fully functioning and undamaged rational faculties. In other words, they can be damaged. Your reason can be damaged. Obviously, it can be damaged by some sort of injury, right? If you like, a pole goes through your head in a car accident or something like that. You might lose some personality if you survive. Then you might lose some personality or access to higher order reasoning, functioning. But that's just one way. That's called organic damage, like where it actually physically damages your brain. There can be other ways as well. There can be ways that you damage, and I'll copy and paste this into the chat. There can be ways that you damage your rational faculties that's a result of sin. Here's a hot take. A lot of people don't want to think about this or talk about it, but on the Christian view, sin can actually harm your rational faculties, right? Like, well, what do you mean? Like, if I break a law, God's law, then I'm just now going to like not be smart. I mean, it's not that simplistic. The idea here is it's not just one action. Sin isn't just one action. It can also be a sustained habit over time. It can become character. And if you can situate yourself very badly with respect to understanding, Thomas Aquinas calls this like the darkening of the intellect. And psychologists recognize this as well. You know, they talk about things like willful ignorance or cognitive biases. You know, you come in with the wrong sort of starting points, for example, like that. You know, like with atheism instead of agnosticism, like or you're going to be really selectively biased with respect to a certain position on a certain topic. And you might be thinking, well, that's not necessarily sin. Well, sin can drive you to that in the sense of, let me put it this way, give an example. If you're, just to use a very simple example, if you're a thief, or if you're an adulterer, or if you're a liar, right, or a cheater or something, then that changes your character, and you into not only character, but you also your intellect. So not only will it change your behavior, it will also force you to start rationalizing your behavior. Like you're going to have to start, if I'm an adulterer, I'm going to have to start lying about it to cover it up, right? And that has an effect on my psyche. It makes me into a kind of person that rationalizes things and thinks that things that aren't true are true. Like I just start to lie so much that I just start to believe what, you know, that's just one simple example. So you could get to a point where, now I can't say like this is happening for you right now. I don't know anybody here, so I can't really like speak to your specific problem or anything like that. But yeah, so it's just something to keep in mind. Just hearing this, I wouldn't necessarily become like a hypochondriac about morality or sin or spirituality or something like that. Yeah, probably. So you mentioned believe in sin, you believe in God, Jesus. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I'm Christian, theist, Catholic, all the above. So yes, that's a great point. Exactly. Just look how drug users or drunks will go to great lengths to justify their using. With rationalization, it manifests, it has consequences, obviously, for further behavior, where they hide. Like a drug addict is not just a drug addict. It can easily turn into being a burglar because they've got to steal in order to supply the drug habit. But it can also not just affect moral behavior and have outcomes for that. It can affect one's intellect, is what I'm claiming as well. For example, like it can affect one's ability. Like I will start to rationalize, like why I don't want to. Maybe this is good for me, and I'll start to do that, and that changes the constitution of my mind. Like I start to think that certain things are more reasonable that I wouldn't have thought before, and I'm forming really poor habits, intellectually speaking. Yeah. So John says the trick is the darkening of the intellect only makes sense experientially. That's true. Yeah. If you live one way and experience God's grace hitting like a freight train, you know what I mean? Absolutely. Yeah. And this And this is the thing too. I'd be cautious about this and very gracious towards other people. I wouldn't just go around and start to be like, yeah, you have a darkened intellect. You have a dark. Like, I would recommend nobody do that, because you're going to make a lot of enemies, and you're probably going to have a lot of false positives. You're going to be accusing people of things maybe that they're not even doing. So yeah, really, you can only. It's good for self-edification, and again, don't be a hypochondriac about this. Don't see problems where there aren't any. But it's just another tool in your toolbox to take into account, is this happening with me? And I think just thinking of it as a possibility also helps to explain why, as Thomas Aquinas was suggesting here, why many people will refuse this knowledge. This knowledge is freely available. Anybody can come to know that God exists, but you'll find a lot of people that deny this. They rail against this. They resist this. They think that God doesn't exist, can possibly exist. They see it as silly. They see it as a fairy tale, a myth. I think a lot of what's driving that could be that darkening of the intellect. Sure. Like, I won't go so far as to say that make individual judgments on individual people, but I think it's a general rule to keep in mind. Yeah. All right. Sorry, I passed this one. Last Freibender says, I think people have great confidence, but the room for doubt never goes away. I guess that's my overall point. There comes a point of unreasonable skepticism, like my car only exists if I see it. Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, and I mentioned this in an earlier video. The idea that you call this unreasonable skepticism. Let me actually get to this next slide, because that's actually another point. So I say skepticism can be healthy or unhealthy. These first 2 points describe it in a healthy way. I think it's fair and fine, and you probably should be this first way. Healthy skepticism enables us to think more clearly and responsibly. It protects us from irrational fads, myths, and fables, just believing the next great thing just because it's hot or something trendy. And healthy skepticism also promotes a prudent humility and openness to new information. I don't have it all figured out, right? So this is all very good, right? But skepticism can become really unhealthy. And when it's carried to extremes, I call this like radical skepticism, okay? Radical skepticism, when carried to extremes, actually paralyzes thought, making us doubt just simple things. Like, we'll get to this in a later live stream, but if I go down here, right here, here's the second way, Aquinas' second argument from God's existence. And he argues, this is the second way argument from efficient causes. And I don't mean to get too tied up in this, because we're not really examining it right now, but I'm just using it as an excuse to explain what I just mentioned about denying like simple things. This is an argument from basically cause and effect. Like, I look out into the world, I see cause and effect happening, and therefore it goes through the argument, and it concludes that there must be a first cause. This might sound familiar to you. You might have even thought about it before, although it's written in really jargony, highfalutin philosophical language. I have to believe the average person has come across these thoughts before, like, well, if things, and then even in the first argument is this argument for motion. I see that certain things are in motion. The world, as I look at it now, things are moving. That had to start somewhere, right? So I see things causing other things, and things having effects. It's like a line of dominoes, right? Well, what was the first domino? This is what he's arguing to. Something has to be the first domino to fall in order to see the things now falling, that is the effects, fall. There had to be something that fell first. Now, this is very basic, but in response to this, many atheists will go so extreme as to deny the very principle of cause and effect. They'll just say, well, maybe some things can be effects without ever having causes. That is what I'm suggesting is an example of this. Radical skepticism, when it's extreme, paralyzes thought. Now you're in a bind. You can't get out. And it makes us doubt first principles, like the principle of cause and effect, without which all knowledge would be impossible. If the principle of cause and effect is not true, like, I can't even rely upon my sensory information, like sight, because cause and effect is involved in that. Like, so many, in fact, I got another slide on that real quick. Right here. So many things happen in this long process right here. If I look at my hand, well, the light's got to hit it, and then the light from my hand has got to hit my eye, and then it's got to make, all of this is in a causal chain. If that principle is just wrong, Like this very basic principle of reasoning, very self-evident. If any of those steps could occur without a cause, knowledge would be impossible. Why? Well, because if those could happen without a cause, then anything could happen without a cause. So anything at all could happen. And now all of a sudden I'm in a real bind because I'm in such a bind here. Let me go back. That I can't even know things at all. And when I'm radically skeptical, like I can't even know basic things. Well, what did this one person say? Basic things like where I parked my car. Basic things like whether the external world outside my head exists. Those are the things I'm going to doubt. And those are silly things that you get to that point. All right. Let's go back to the chat here. Yeah. Oh, great. Thanks, Brian. So psychiatry and psychology in your bio makes me want to subscribe. So I'm subscribed. Thank you for that. And I appreciate that. I do have some videos on depression. And if you look at the link in this description and that very first link that I gave in the chat replay, you'll find an interview I did a week or two ago with a young man at Iowa State University. He interviews people. That was like almost his 100th interview. And I discussed my academic work on depression. So if that is up your alley, you're really interested in that stuff, you might really like that interview. Yeah. Okay, just getting to the chats here. There's absolutely room for doubt in faith. Doubting Thomas, she mentions, the Apostle Jesus is a good example of that. In the end, his questioning brought him closer to God. I really like this example of Thomas. And so if you remember the example of the Apostle Thomas, right? Jesus resurrects, as we're told in Scripture. Christians believe that, of course. It's the foundation of all our salvation. As Paul says in the New Testament, if Jesus didn't really rise, then all of this is in vain. All of our faith is in vain. We're stuck in our sin. We can't be saved, right? But the defeat of death is the defeat of sin. So he rises from the grave. He resurrects. He appears to all of his disciples, his apostles. But in this account that we're told, apparently all of them, it seemed, were present except for Thomas. He just happened not to be there. And then when they told him this later, he didn't believe them. And he says something like, well, unless I can see Jesus with my own eyes, like I won't believe it until I see it, right? Unless I can touch his hand where the nails went in and touch his side where the spear pierced into him and pierced his heart, then I'm not going to believe. The interesting thing about this, a week passes. Jesus reappears. Thomas is there. Everybody else is there. It's like their weekly powwow, I guess. They were all there again. And Jesus provides the answers that he had asked for. Now, it's important for a couple of things. First of all, you might think that this should be what he does to atheists that say, hey, if God exists, he should just show himself. Well, there's a difference in attitude here as well. I think we should keep in mind. Thomas was genuinely inquiring, right? He was genuinely doubtful, of course, but he wished that Jesus were alive. It's not like this sort of smug attitude, like, well, if he, like an atheist would have this, and I've experienced this anecdotally many, many times, right? When people have this attitude, they say, well, just show him this, like make him do a miracle like this. You see this even in the Gospels. The religious leaders, they want him to do miracles for them to prove he's Messiah, as if he's like a little pony and does dances for them. As any person wouldn't like that. Jesus doesn't like that. He's not going to respond to that because he's a person. He's not just going to perform for you, like a little puppet just because you ask him to. But he responds to Thomas in kind, graciously revealing that. And I think that's a lesson there too, because Jesus didn't say, well, you know what? Just have faith, Thomas. Like he didn't leave him there. He actually provided the evidence. And I think this is a lesson for us, because it's not wrong to ask for evidence. Like if you really want to believe in God, then ask for evidence. I mean, you have to be open and responsible and realistic about the kind of evidence you receive. But like, you can't say, well, it's got to be now or something, or it can't be proven scientifically. Well, why not? Why can't it be proven scientifically? In principle, God's existence can't be proven scientifically. I'll just let that cat out of the bag. It's not going to happen. Why? Well, because science investigates the natural world. Science will therefore only get results and understanding and observation of the natural world. God is not natural. He's supernatural. He's divine. So if you're using tools, like if you're using the tools of science, like I was talking to my students yesterday, if you're using and expecting to use the tools of science to answer the question as to whether God exists, that's kind of like trying to dig a ditch with a knife instead of a shovel. You're just using the wrong tool. It's just not going to work. You can get somewhat far, but it's not the right tool. It's same thing in morality, for example. Like morality is not scientific, it's philosophical. It's in the domain of, like, so if I say, it's wrong to torture children, just for fun, that's a moral claim. That is that can't be proven scientifically. What would I do? Like, do I measure their pain levels? Still, I wouldn't know if pain is a good thing or a bad thing, morally speaking, because morality is not scientific. It's not empirical in that sense. It can't be proven. So if I'm trying to use the tools of science to discover moral truths, I'm not going to find it. If I'm trying to use the tools of science to discover theological truths as to whether God exists or not, similarly, it's just a bad tool. You can get far, you can get somewhat, but again, because it only examines and observes the natural world, you will only be able to examine and observe the things in the natural world that God has had some effect on. Yeah. All right. Now, some of you guys are talking to each other, and that's awesome. Yeah, so let me respond to this. Mac here says, welcome to the chat. Special pleading. This is a while ago. If you say it's special pleading, if you say it's God without evidence or justification, it's just God. Yeah, this is known, for example, as the so-called God of the gaps position. Like, for example, people would do this in the past. They'd say, we don't really know what storms, like even Greek. Ancient Greeks did this. For example, we don't really know meteorology, although Aristotle wrote a treatise on meteorology, believe it or not. But we don't really know much about that. So they believed that the gods were to blame. Like, we just didn't make the right sacrifice or whatever, right? So whatever gaps in understanding, another way, that's the gaps, the God of the gaps. You just plug God in there and that just makes it all gravy, I guess. Now we got an explanation. That's not what we're doing here. And first of all, two things. It's not what we're doing here, first of all. We're not just saying we have no evidence whatsoever. We do have evidence that God exists. It depends on what kind of evidence you're referring to. Is it going to be direct empirical observation? Again, no. But many things in science don't have direct empirical observation. In fact, they have indirect empirical observation, like the locations of certain galaxies and stars. We can't directly observe those, but we can postulate, we can theorize and infer that they exist. And don't even get me started on the multiverse. Like, people think that that's a real thing just because it's like flooded our media nowadays and our movies and in Hollywood and everything. Everything is about the multiverse. There is no direct evidence of a multiverse at all. It's just theory. No direct evidence whatsoever. So again, so that gets to my second point. Second point is that it's not God of the gaps. Well, I'll say this with respect to science. There is sometimes a rejoinder here, science of the gaps. People will say this. They'll say, so let me give you a setup. So with respect to the idea of the soul, okay, there's a lot of debate about this, whether the soul exists or not. And religious people, for far back as you can remember, have always said that there is some soul and that it goes into the afterlife after people die, right? This isn't present in very many religions, or it's reincarnated, for example. Okay. Well, science comes along, and modern fans of science and apologists of science, they will say that that's just the God of the gaps approach. Like, you don't really understand the brain and neuroscience and all that, so you're just saying that it's God, it's just the soul or whatever. Problem with that is they're doing the same thing. They're saying things like, it's not necessarily science of the gap, but they offer this sort of promissory note or promissory note on what science can provide. Things like consciousness. We don't fully understand consciousness in science. We don't understand much of the brain, but I'm not even talking about the brain. I'm talking about consciousness. It's such a mysterious thing. In an all completely natural world, something like consciousness should not exist, and yet it does. So scientists who take this science of the gaps approach, allegedly, would be accused of doing the same thing that they're accusing, theists of doing. They would say, well, we don't understand it now, but whatever gaps in understanding that we have, science will eventually, resolve that for us. It's like this idea that science is sort of this, this provides a promissory note. It will eventually make good on all these things. But I think that's wrong in this case with consciousness. I didn't expect to be talking about consciousness, but consciousness in principle cannot be natural as well. Because if you want to look further up on this, like why consciousness in principle cannot be natural or physical, look up the so-called hard problem of consciousness by people like David Chalmers and so on. All right, let's see. Good agnostic. Sorry, I had to. Okay. Yeah. So, and then Mac says here, so funny, all the comments about Max. Right. So he says, belief in God. Belief is not a choice. You have to give me the evidence or reasoning to convince me. Let's stop there. So that's actually, it's a debate, and most people think that one of these positions is much stronger than the other. There's a debate between direct voluntaristic belief and indirect voluntaristic belief. That is, so I think this is the winner, indirect voluntarism when it comes to belief. That idea that voluntarism just refers to the volition, the will. I can make myself believe. I think that's wrong. And that's exactly what Mac is saying. Like, you can't choose to believe. You can't choose to believe. Like, just try right now. Try to make yourself believe that, like, so I assume that the room that you're sitting in, unless you're sitting in the dark, it has a light on. Try to force yourself to believe that the light's not on. Like, try to make yourself genuinely and fully believe that. You can't. But what you can do is you can indirectly force yourself or make yourself believe that the light is off. All you gotta do is walk over and turn it on, and then you will come to believe. So this works with other beliefs as well. Like, even beliefs about myself. Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe that's not a good example, but I can't make myself, we'll go back to the basic, the obvious example here, the elephant in the room, belief in God. I can't directly make myself believe in God. Like, I just snap my fingers and suddenly I have the belief with no evidence whatsoever. It just doesn't work like that. But I can make it such that I believe in God, because I go over there and provide, just like I'm going to turn the light on, I'm going to provide evidence and reasons. I'm going to seek those things. And then based on the evidence and reasons that I arrive at and that convince me, then I will come to believe that God exists. Yeah. All right. Good. I see somebody mentioning Graham Oppy in the. I love it. Graham Oppy is he's an atheist philosopher of religion. I think Graham Oppy has interesting points on this. Is the universe a result of natural causes, supernatural causes? We keep finding natural causes that were once supernatural causes. That's true. Like, this gets back to like this promissory note that eventually science does make good and provides supernatural wants supernatural explanations, it replaces them with natural explanations. That's true. And that's what provides people with the confidence to think that that will always happen. But again, that's just, honestly, that's a faith. It's a faith that it will happen. That, but we can't know for sure, of course. And with respect to, I guess I'll say this, just with respect to the universe as a whole, many people will say that all you need is a Big Bang. Like, just talk about the beginning of the universe, right? The Big Bang is our explanation. Naturalists, atheists will say this. They'll say, you don't need a God to explain that because we figured it out with science. Big Bang did it. The Big Bang theory was actually invented by a Catholic priest, Lemaitre. And he, at least, was someone who thought that religion and science were not in conflict. And if you want to look further on this, I should probably do a video of like all of the scientists. Gosh, there's so many that believed in theism of some kind, and most of them were Christian. Yeah, so with respect to the Big Bang, yeah, okay, let's keep going here. Science only go full. Okay, Grandma Oppie. Now I see Mac having a lot of questions. I love this. I'm gonna have to go back through this and just, oh man, are morals objective? I actually did a video on that, a video series on that. You can find on the channel. Are there objective moral duties? I think so. So of course, it's immoral not to do an objective moral duty. These aren't questions that we can like satisfactorily answer in the time that we have left. But let me see if I get any that were like, okay. Yeah, Lemaitre. Okay, let's get to this point. So Jack, welcome to the chat. Jack says this: I don't understand faith. Unless you can rule out natural explanations for something like existence itself, how can someone reach the supernatural conclusion? This is a great question. So theists who use arguments for God's existence, I think that one of the most convincing is the cosmological argument. And there are several arguments for God's existence. And the cosmological argument uses something like this, a modified version. There's several versions of the cosmological argument. One of them is called the Kalam modified version. It's the one that William Lane Craig, for example. William Lane Craig is very hot on. He's like the expert on it. And he formulates it as this, that everything that begins to exist must have a cause for its existence. Like, things don't just pop into existence, right? You might think, well, the Big Bang does. Well, even scientists don't believe that. And people get confused about this too, because they say, well, scientists will acknowledge that there was nothing before the Big Bang. The problem is when scientists say there was nothing before the Big Bang, the term that they're using for nothing should be used in scare quotes, because it's not actually nothing. It's something like primordial ooze or primordial soup or energy or something like that. That's not nothing. That's existent being right there. Philosophically speaking, if it really truly is nothing, that means there's no being whatsoever. Nothing exists, absolutely nothing. And if that were the case, nothing absolutely exists whatsoever, then something like the Big Bang, which has a beginning of its existence, never should have happened. And so to your point about natural explanations, I don't think we can have a natural explanation for that. Here's why. Because, well, one natural explanation, as I just mentioned, could be like this primordial soup, this energy or whatever. Problem with that is you just kick it back one further. Well, how did that get there? Is that eternal or what? Right. And so, yeah, so I think that the whatever, nothing, quote, quote, scare quote, nothing that physicists believe in, I don't think that even that would have a, and you have these other models, like that's the Big Bang theory that's very popular. You have these other models called like the like an oscillating model where there's kind of this, collapse and rebang, and then collapse and rebang kind of oscillates. You also have like a big crunch model where we're going to reverse and just stay in that point. But those also, I don't think, are very viable explanations, because again, you think about it in terms, like I mentioned before, like a line of dominoes, right? And we only briefly, I would love to get in future live cast or future videos into the 5 ways and other arguments for God's existence. But the one that I shared earlier, for example, this two of them that I looked at right here, this argument for motion: some things move, therefore there had to be something that first moved them. Some things cause other things. Causation is happening, cause and effects happening, therefore there must be some first cause that started those things up. That's just using reason and logic to get to those conclusions, not using revelation, not anything mystical or religious about it. And that, for example, I gave the example of like a line of dominoes. If you see dominoes that are falling now, there had to be some first domino that fell. Otherwise, if there was never a beginning domino to fall, then it would not be falling right now, right? Just think about that. Line of dominoes, you see falling happening right now. You see motion, or you see causation happening, cause and effect. If you go all the way back in time, it can't extend, because if you say it extends into infinity, infinity is really long, and it would never have begun falling. And if it never begins falling, it can never be falling now. The fact that it is falling now underscores the conclusion that it had to have started falling. Therefore, there had to be some first cause. That's basic. That's basic argumentation, the cosmological argument, in a couple forms there. I mentioned 3 just now: the argument from motion, the argument from causation, both two of the 5 ways of Aquinas, and I mentioned Kalam argument. Yeah. Now, we unfortunately are running out of time, guys, and I think the battery on my camera is dying, so I'm going to let you go for now. We'll wrap it up. I really, really appreciate everybody being here, and I will mine the chat for all these great questions and points and everything like that. So yeah, I really appreciate you guys being here. And if you like this, hang around, subscribe, share, be around for the next live stream. Let's make it a thing. Thanks for your question. I normally live stream at this time, Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern. I'm in Baltimore. So this is after a full day of teaching, and I'm, yeah. So, all right. Well, it's been wonderful. Hope you guys have a great end of your week and weekend, and hopefully I'll see you next week. All right. Take care. Bye.